Hey, how you doing? We're going to finish up our little discussion here about HyperV 3.0 and Server 2012. And, okay, you can see we're looking at the HyperV Manager. One thing I should probably stress, and I haven't really said to this point, is that the big difference here between virtualization via HyperV in Microsoft land and virtualization for VMware, and mostly I'm speaking of VSX now, is that you have to be running it on at least Server 2008 with a 64-bit processor, or in the 64-bit edition of Server 2008, or of course Server 2012, which is 64-bit data center. I don't believe this is going to work on 2012 Essentials or anything like that, which makes sense. But that's the thing. VMware can run on its own hardware. It doesn't need a host operating system. HyperV is a hosted virtualization. Now, the benefits we've already seen, which is that, say I want to store something or get something on the local hard drive or whatever is available to me on the actual server that's running HyperV on top of it, I can get at that stuff much more easily than I can do in, say, ESX, where everything is stored in a data store and I have to go through some convolutions to try to get stuff in and out of there. If I'm not, directly working with ESX or not directly working with resources only available to the VM. So that said, understand that's a big difference, which means that HyperV is only going to work as well as the operating system underlying it. So make sure you got your P's and Q's in order and the I's dotted and the T's crossed. There's really nothing more to it than that. So I just wanted to get that out of the way right up front. And with that said, let's move on to what we really want to talk about here. First off, we see we got a VM running here. We've got the Server 03 running. And it's only using about 512 meg. And let's look at our little memory tab down here in the status. 512 memory, and it's only demanding 87. We go up to 2 gigs. So you see that the dynamic memory setting that we put, which remember that was in the settings of the VM under memory, you can see that we can start as low as 512 and go all the way up to 2 gig. But it's only using, well, it's only assigned 512, but it's only really using 87 meg right now. So that's kind of nice, is because you're sharing, you've got virtual memory, virtual machines, but they're relying on very physical resources. So that could be kind of helpful if you're running a number of VMs and you had limited resources. That's why another consideration to come into play is that if you're going to really invest in Hyper-V and the virtualization going the Microsoft way, you are probably wanting to invest in a little heavier iron. Something that has got multiple physical processors with multiple physical cores, copious amounts of memory. Even 32 gigs sounds like a lot, but in a server platform, if you were hosting, say, 8 VMs per host that were all server OSs doing some kind of heavy lifting, you could run out of resources really quickly and bring that thing to its knees. So, which also begs the question of, okay, well, that means there's be certain versions of Windows that, how Windows licensing goes. Some versions some versions, at least historically, have had a cap on the number of processors they'll support. Usually memory's not in there, but you have to consider all these things. The other thing is licensing. Yes, VMware has licensing as well, but that's one thing that's not real clear with Hyper-V. What is the licensing outside of the VMs themselves? Server 03 VM that we have here, for example. Okay, it's got its own licensing, but what does that mean to the VM licensing? What does that mean to, say, CPU or or virtual machine licensing in and of itself? If we look here and we look for some kind of applet, and let's see if we can get up our little start menu here. Let's see if there's anything here. I don't see anything here. We could end up we can end up having a lot of setup and a lot of hardware and a lot of stuff and not having enough licensing and not being able to use it. So it's a very real situation. Now, you know, I am using an eval copy, so licensing is kind of a loose topic. So just be aware. Yeah, I'm not seeing anything in licensing here either. So, okay. Now, let's get on to the real crux of the matter here. You see that I have another VM here, Windows 7. This is functional. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you about importing and exporting. Now, this is kind of a neat way to back up or maybe archive somewhere else a VM. But here's a word of warning. The file it makes is best moved somewhere far, far away if you're going to be doing anything within the directory that VM happens to live in. I actually had an issue that I'll tell you about in a minute here, but in the meantime, let's just show you kind of what it's like to export a VM. Now, notice that we have the same menu options here. You see export is here, import. We could actually import a VM, which means we take a saved exported file and actually bring it into our server. Kind of a manual way of doing, I guess, a vMotion, if you thought about it that way. But we're worried about export right now. Either way, the right-click menu or down here. Notice that you're not going to be able to do an export when the VM is up on and active. You see, we can do no export. We can do a snapshot, but we can't do an export. So, but if it's off, as this VM happens to be, we can do it. So first thing is I'm going to choose the export. It's going to say what location do I want it to go to, and I'm going to say into this VM. I made this directory on the local drive, the VMS, and it's going to make a new one in here. So select OK, and I'm going to export it. And you can see you get a progress bar here. So 1%. It takes a little while to do. But once it's done, it'll save the file. Okay, while that's busy, because that is going to take a while, and I'd rather not cut the video at this point, we're going to discuss something that's kind of similar to the export, and that is a snapshot. Yes, it is a snapshot, just as a VMware snapshot is a point-in-time view of the VM. It's what is the status, what was running, what was happening at that time. They call it a backup, but when you look at the files of the snapshot tend to be much smaller than the files of the full VM. For example, the Server 2003. We're talking 2 gigs for this size for the memory and the disk and everything that's set in there, whereas a snapshot might only be about 100 meg. So it's really, I think of the snapshot as being more like a big system restore file, which means you have to have a functioning VM to be able to really use it. There are better ways to back up snapshots. Or I'm sorry, to back up VMs in a snapshot. A snapshot is just a way to let you maybe install a new application, maybe change settings, maybe try different memory settings, that kind of thing. Well, if you make a snapshot before you do that and you happen to screw something up, you could always go back and everything's back the way it was, just like System Restore in Windows XP and above. So we're going to go ahead and make a snapshot on the Server 2008. And notice that just as we couldn't do an export on a VM that was active for an export of a backup file, we also cannot do a snapshot of a VM that is off. So, see, keep that in mind. Exports and imports are for VMs that are off or don't exist, obviously, because there's 3 different conditions for exporting and importing virtual machines. But snapshots Snapshots, the VM has to be up and running, the OS has to be active. So snapshots on, exports, imports off. Think of it that way. So before I confuse you anymore, I'm going to go ahead and do a snapshot here. This is active, Server 2003 is running. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, do a snapshot. And again, I can do it here, or I can do it down in this context menu here. See the snapshot. I'll go ahead and click it here. And we're taking, you see it's taking the snapshot, and we can check the progress, 5%. And what will happen is when that is done taking the snapshot, it's going to show up down here in this little area here. And I'll show you what happens when we restore one too. We're going to take a snapshot, we're going to make a change in the Server 03 VM, and then we're going to restore the snapshot that we took, and you'll see the change. It's an old trick, but hey, I haven't seen it done in VMware or HyperV yet. Everybody does it in VMware, and you know, I just have to be different.
Remember.
Yes, okay. Of course it will. Thank you. So, all right, so it's taking the snapshot. Okay, and while we're waiting, I thought I'd just show you something here that has nothing to do with virtualization. I was kind of poking around. I did a little video on kind of interface tricks with Server 2012/Windows 8. Well, I kind of noticed when I move my cursor up here to the top of the screen, see it turns into a little hand? I don't know if you can see that. Hopefully you can. It turns into a little hand. Well, if I grab that hand and hold it and hit the left mouse button, see, I suddenly get this kind of movable window. Kind of reminds me of Linux and virtual desktops. But I can put that there, and then I can actually resize it. And see, there we go. I don't know what function that really holds. I don't know what that's for, but it's kind of neat to look at, I guess. Okay, and while this is running, let's actually take a look at what we're doing. We have what memory. See, we're using 81 meg right now on Server 03. You can see it's running okay, application's healthy, okay. Networking, there's our IP address that we picked up from the virtual switch. And of course we don't have replication enabled on this server. So our snapshot's almost done here. In fact, while it's taking a snapshot, we know it's still running. So I'm going to go ahead and send it the 3-letter salute here. Okay. Actually, that's good to know. See, now you know I'm not perfect. Most likely because the snapshot is in progress. So it doesn't want me to touch anything. However, that's just console. Okay. We have, let's go ahead and close this or minimize this. Now you see in our snapshot window, we actually have a snapshot. Now is what the system is doing right now, and this is actually where it was a minute ago or a few minutes ago. Now, I'm going to go back into my console window here, send it to the 3-key salute here. See, now it's letting us do it. Now, that doesn't mean that services would necessarily be unavailable during a snapshot, but definitely the console wasn't. So, we'll just go in. Yes, I know, not best practices to have a blank password on a server, but this is for testing. So no, I'm not the type of admin or consultant that would ever put a blank password on anything. So now we're starting up here. Check the progress of our... Okay. And our other VM is about a quarter of the way through its export, so that's good. This is another thing. Actually, this is actually a good example because I'm using the disk so heavily for the export, and I'm probably using a little more memory than I normally would be. Let's go ahead and check the status of this. So we're using a little more memory. Nothing in the networking, but there's the IP address. Okay. So that right there shows you about resource use. Our physical resources are fine. But because we're busy using the disk, it affected the speed of this VM here coming up, because normally that comes up a lot quicker. So that's a very good real-world example of what you could run into if you don't have enough resources on the server and have VMs that are particularly busy. Now, part of it too is, I mean, we're basically on one disk here. This is a test server, so I'm sure if it was on a SAN or some type of RAID array, it might be a little faster, but it's definitely something to keep note of. And the other thing is that it's okay. Part of the title of this video is pitfalls. Let me tell you the first pitfall. While VMware, or I keep saying VMware, I'm sorry, HyperV 3.0 is definitely a lot closer to its competition as far as manageability, ease of use, and design. However, I'm not convinced it uses memory as well. I'm not convinced it's quite as robust yet because of issues like this. I've had this exact same setup on an ESXi server on the exact same hardware and not seen the slowdowns. And part of that is, I think, because this is a hosted virtualization server. So you have to consider the underlying processes in use by the server itself. This server, for example, is actually running Active Directory. It is a domain controller as well as a DNS server. And if you happen to have a deployment that, maybe you don't have 10 physical servers running, maybe you've got 3 or 4, and you decide to do this so you can try to virtualize your server farm and have more servers, well, then you better beef them up. Because it's not just a pure software solution. Okay, anyway, enough talk. I'm going to go ahead and change this background here. So, I'm actually kind of glad it's a little slow and a little messed up, because I like seeing, I don't know about you, but I like how-to videos to show me real world. Show me too much of the ideal world and I suddenly tune out. So, okay, I'll just change it to this nice moonlit ascent background. I'll apply that. And that'll eventually happen as soon as the write heads catch up on my poor beleaguered hard drive. Let's check the stat at the okay, 38%, good. Let's go back here. Okay, we're good. And right now, what you're seeing here has virtually nothing to do with memory. You see, we're not really using that much memory. We have a lot of overhead left to go. We're not even using anything. It has everything to do with disk writes. So here's also a very good example of what happens when you have an overtaxed storage system. So, okay, what we're going to do then is we have this virtual machine up right now, and we see we've changed the background and we're very happy with it. Fine. I'm going to go ahead and close that. Okay, now we have this snapshot. You say, well, that's nice, that's a snapshot, so what? Well, if you notice here, this snapshot's showing a point in time. Actually, if you go to now, you see there's that window. Well, this window shows what it looked like back then. Kind of a neat little feature. I don't know. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and apply this snapshot. Now, here's my choices. I can take a snapshot of the way the machine is right now and apply the old one, or I can just apply it and forget about it. I'm going to go ahead and just apply it because all I did was change the background. Okay, and you see Now, to apply the snapshot, it actually had to shut down the VM. And now starting it up, it's restoring it. You can see it right here, the status. Yep. No, we're not doomed. We're not doomed. In fact, it's almost done. Okay. Now, what we've done is we've got the VM back up and running. We've restored our snapshot, and watch this. I'm going to do a little three-finger salute here. And our super secret non-password. And when it comes up, what you're going to see is the state of the machine of the snapshot. And you can nest snapshots. You can take multiples. And in this view here, you'll have a whole little tree of snapshots with different times and dates. And the last one will always be what is currently running right now. So, da-da-da-da-da.
Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're my only hope.
Yeah, whatever. So, okay, where are we with? Yep, we're still exploring. And you see now, look, our desktop wallpaper. We're back to the beach in the clouds. Isn't that beautiful? So, you see that now we're running off our snapshot. That's pretty much all there is to it. But realize that if you're going to apply a snapshot, your virtual machine is going to have to come down for a bit, which means people are going to get disconnected. So, hopefully you don't have to do it too often, though. So, probably best in a test environment, or if you just want to make sure that, you know, your last group of updates didn't totally hose your server. So, I'm going to go ahead and actually shut down this VM just to give some more resources to this export that's going on. So, I'm going to go ahead and actually shut it down. And we can watch the process here. Because we have the tools installed, you can see it actually is shutting down instead of just powering off cold. Okay, so we've finished off our export, and our export should be in our VMs directory, so we're going to go ahead and take a look in there. VMs, there it is. And if you open up and look at our exported virtual machine, see there's all the snapshots it had, the virtual hard disk. See, there's 3 gig. And then here's the actual virtual machine, which is really just configuration files. All the goodies are really in the virtual hard disk. And that's something interesting to note here. Here's the snapshots. And you see there's some, basically these are the configuration files for each snapshot. And notice how small these files are. This is why I say this is not really a backup option, because this doesn't contain the operating system, the state of the memory at the time, the hard disk. This is really just the changes, which is a far cry from the size of the VM here in the virtual hard disk. Look at this, 3 gig. Okay. And it's not just 3 gig, that's not the entire size of the disk allocated. there's about, this server 03 has a 40 gig partition allocated to it. This is just everything that's in use on that VM right now. And what will happen is, if we restore this particular exported virtual machine, all this will come back, including the settings that say, oh yeah, the disk needs to be 40 gigabytes. So, which means we also have to keep in mind that wherever we restore it to has enough room for it. So, anyway, we've done that. Now, I'm going to do something that actually ended in disaster the last time I tried this. In fact, to prevent that disaster, note that VMs, this is a directory I created. This is where I'm storing my virtual machines. I'm actually going to copy this entire folder to another directory. I'll put it in share. I do kind of like these Windows 8 and 2012 status on the copies. That's always interesting. We'll let that go for a minute. Boop, 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 boop. Viva Las Vegas. Viva, viva. Okay, so that's done. We've moved, I've actually taken a precaution of actually copying the entire VM exported directory to another location. And you see the original is still here and it's still intact. All the goodies are there. Okay, now I'm going to show you why I did that. And this could fall under the pitfalls section. I'm going to go ahead and actually delete this virtual machine. Okay? Now remember, we just did an export into an entirely different directory. Deleting it. All gone. Okay, so we've deleted that virtual machine. It's completely gone. All right? And we'll refresh the view here. Now all I have is Windows 7. Okay, now let's go look at our saved directory. Let's look in there. Okay, still have our snapshots. Look in here. Okay, we still have our VMs. Good. And our virtual machines. All right. So we know they're there. Let's try to do an import. Let's take the machine we just deleted and import it back. So we'll import the virtual machine. Say next. We'll browse for it and we know where our VM should be. Here, and we know it's this one, server 03. We just got to click the directory, select, and see it finds the virtual machine. So go next. Now, here's the thing. We have three choices. We can register the virtual machine in place, which means, okay, it uses the ID it has. Basically, it makes it a brand new VM on this HyperV server. We can restore it, which means basically we could do restore, which means we're restoring something that's missing. Or we can do a copy, which means we basically are creating a clone of an existing VM, but we're going to make it a new instance of it. So you see, create a unique ID. We're going to try to do it in place. We'll go next. Okay, and let's see what happens here. Okay, now we've imported our virtual machine with its snapshots. Now let's take a look at our VMs directory. There's server 03. There's all the snapshots. Virtual hard disks. Okay, so everything looks like it's there. Okay. Now, Let's go ahead and delete this again. Yes. Now it's gone. Refresh it. We'll go back to our directory. And look at that. You see there's suddenly nothing in here. We've got the virtual hard disk. We have nothing in the configuration. We have no file. Now, if I try to restore that VM from that directory, say import virtual machine. Now I'm going to go, remember we already did this, same place we went to last time. Go browse, and I'm going to go into my VMs directory. I'll say server 2003. And go next. You see this? We can't do it. It's gone. Now, what does that mean? Well, in place, I'm not sure if in place means it's actually going to run it from the actual directory that we imported from. That would seem kind of stupid considering that our HyperV settings say that virtual machines are supposed to run in this directory, not in any other directory. So the fact that you actually could do an export, delete it, do an import, and then when you go back and find the original exported VM is gone or corrupt like that is kind of scary. This is why I say if you're going to do imports and exports on any kind of regular basis, you would probably be wise and well advised to do as I did and have them in a different location than where you exported or imported them from. That doesn't seem quite right and seems like quite a big screw up. You could say I'm not using it right, you could say this or that, but it's my understanding that VMs are supposed to run in a certain directory. That's what the settings are, and that didn't happen. So this falls squarely under pitfall. Beware, because I'm sure that if you didn't have a backup of this VM and you had to do an import or an export, and you happened to just follow the sequence that I did, it would ruin your day and possibly your career. So anyway, let's look at our Windows 7 setup here real quick. And it looks all right. Anyway, really not a heck of a lot more to be said about HyperV or any of these, and I've kind of told you the pitfalls. You know, the fact is, before I started doing these videos and looking at it, I hadn't spent a heck of a lot of time with HyperV. So, and what helped a lot was having VMware experience. Now, I've obviously not shown you every possible tuning option or permutation of this, and there's stuff about, probably about the virtual SAN manager and the switch manager that I didn't go into. But you know what, if I can get this thing up and running and get it functional with the amount of information I came in with, you're going to be off and running, and you can play around with tweaking it later. So anyway, that's it. That's my little demonstration, dissertation, and how-to for HyperV. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was informative, and I thank you for sticking with me. Hey, have a great day, and we'll be talking to you.